Since the first man-made nuclear blast in July 1945, scientists have chronicled the devastating effects of an atomic explosion. The evidence now indicates that a nuclear explosion may have occurred on Earth as early as 1908. June 30th, 1908, over 12,000 square miles of Siberian tundra was rocked by an exploding fireball. The blast was 10 times as powerful as the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Yet, atomic power was unknown on Earth. What was the Siberian fireball?
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
In an age when satellites have become commonplace in the heavens above Earth, it is possible to conceive of another civilization sending a distant probe to our planet. There's a startling theory that such a probe may have arrived on Earth just after the turn of the century, and that it was programmed to land in the vast open spaces of Siberia. In the 4 million square miles of Siberian tundra, there are only a handful of population centers. For the most part, it is a land that nature has forsaken. A layer of permafrost descending 1,000 feet below the surface makes farming virtually impossible. The barren land supports very little animal life and only a small, hardy population. The lives of the people have changed little over the hundreds of years. The stories they tell of their past are simple tales whose origins can easily be traced. The traders in Vanavara, a tiny hamlet 3,000 miles east of Moscow, maintain a legend, however, that has puzzled scientists for 80 years. They say that a bluish, cylindrically shaped object came hurtling in from outer space. It was the morning of June 30th, 1908. At precisely 7:17, the object exploded. The story of that explosion has been passed down through a generation to people who remember it today. Dorothy Raisonen's parents witnessed the explosion.
There was this big boom. They couldn't see, and the earth shook under them, and of course they all fell down and prayed and cried, you know. My children got hysterical. The sky turned kind of a dirty orange, a haze got in there.
Technical journals and daily newspapers as far away as California reported that dirty haze seemed to settle on the horizon following the explosion. The blast that occurred in Tunguska was so intense that it knocked people off their feet, 200 miles from the blast site. Amazingly, however, there was not one human fatality. Whatever the object was, it struck in Tunguska in the middle of a swamp. What it was, or how it could have caused such massive destruction, remained a mystery. Barographs, a primitive form of seismic recorder, mechanically measured the magnitude of the explosion as far away as London and Washington, D.C. but they in no way adequately communicated the intensity of the event. Nor did the brilliant sunsets, which painted the skies for several days after the explosion. The first successful scientific expedition into Tunguska was not launched until 19 years after the explosion. In 1927, a young Russian meteorologist, Leonid Kulik, set out to prove that the massive destruction was caused by a meteor colliding with the Earth. Kulik's theory was fully accepted at the time as being perfectly logical. After carefully studying the work done by Kulik and other Soviet scientists, a book was authored on the subject by Thomas Atkins.
And also by using some information that he had acquired from a seismic station, an earthquake station in Irkutsk in southern Siberia. He manages to locate, after a rather long and arduous expedition, the fall point or epicenter of the explosion. What he finds is a shattered forest. The extent of the destruction that lay before him was mind-boggling. He got up on a high ridge and looked out for 10 or 12 miles. And as far as he could see, toward the north, every single visible tree had been knocked down. He gets to the center of this destroyed forest, and he finds not a crater, but something far stranger and something for which he had no explanation. He found a forest that was still upright, a dead forest.
It was here, in the very epicenter of the blast, that Kulik expected to find the same sort of crater that was gouged into the Arizona landscape 50,000 years ago by a giant meteor. "4,000 feet in diameter and 600 feet deep, the Arizona crater has resisted forces of rain and wind to remain virtually unchanged." If a similar type of meteor had crashed in Siberia, then logically it should have left just such a crater. But it did not. That fact has sparked the controversy over the origins of the Tunguska explosion, which continues today. The information on Tunguska is still being cataloged and analyzed. Some modern-day astronomers believe, however, that Kulik was on the right track. They maintain that a crumbly sort of meteorite, a carbonaceous chondrite, was responsible for the explosion.
If we have a carbonaceous chondrite that is 40 or 50 feet in diameter, that's a huge object. What happened at Tunguska...
Ronald Oriti, who supports the meteor theory, is an associate lecturer at Griffith Park Observatory.
It would probably totally disrupt in the atmosphere at an altitude of anywhere from 5 to 10 or 15 miles above the Earth. The energy that it releases at that time is the same energy that would be released by a much stronger object, an iron object, of the same mass upon striking the Earth. So what we find with Tunguska is that we can entirely account for what took place if we have a very soft and crumbly meteorite that explodes in the atmosphere.
Most meteors burn up before they can explode. That fact has not escaped the notice of an equally qualified scientist, Charles Cowell of Caltech, who supports the comet theory.
Comets are basically dirty snowballs. That is, they're composed mostly of water ice with some dust mixed in. They're very fragile things. They're not solid rocks. This helps explain why the Tunguska event did not leave a large crater on the ground. Even though it was a very massive, violent event, there were no large craters found. This is because the comet exploded before it hit the ground. The blast effect knocked down trees and people many miles from the center of the explosion, but it did not leave much evidence on the ground. There were no large chunks of meteorites left. This can only be explained by the fact that the comet disappeared before it hit the ground, whereas a meteorite would have left a large crater and fragments scattered all over the place. I think the comet theory is the best one, simply because it explains all of the facts with the minimum number of assumptions.
Some scientists are even willing to reach further for possible explanations. Dr. Isaac Asimov is a physicist, mathematician, and author.
Until, say 20 years ago, the universe we knew was very staid and stable, and nothing particularly exciting happened. But since then, with the discovery of quasars in 1963, we have come to believe and to have evidence for the fact that this is a violent universe we live in, and that there are all kinds of strange objects we didn't dream of before. For instance, there are black holes. The ordinary black hole is a monstrous thing with a mass equal anywhere from 3 times that of the sun to billions of times the mass of the sun. There are at least theories that there are such things as mini black holes, formed at the very moment of creation in the Big Bang 15 billion years ago. The ravening gases that emerged from the original Big Bang may have created sufficient compressions here and there to squeeze small bits of matter into black holes. Supposing one of these mini black holes that perhaps didn't have any more mass than an asteroid came down and struck the Earth. It would absorb atmospheric molecules as it dashed through the air, heating it up and creating a terrific explosion. Now, there is no evidence that this is what happened. In fact, to tell you the truth, there is no hard and fast evidence that many black holes exist at all.
The explanation, however, with which Dr. Asimov feels most comfortable is the comet theory proposed by Charles Cole. Other explanations have been offered, particularly by Soviet scientists who have had more opportunity to study the physical evidence. Soviet science writer Alexander Kazantsev proposed in the early 1950s that the Tunguska blast was nuclear in origin. But who or what could have triggered such a blast remained a mystery. Despite the diverging opinions, scientists have one area of agreement: that on June 30th, 1908, some outer space object collided with the Earth. But in order to seek a logical explanation of what happened in the Tunguska, we must go back and analyze the blast itself.
There was a gigantic fireball, a huge pillar of fire that blossomed up into the air for some 20 miles and was visible for several hundred miles away. It was an instantaneous thermal flash as a result of this fireball that scorched the forest for, again, for hundreds of miles. There were shock waves that rushed through the forest, knocking trees down.
Russian writer Kazantsev, Atkins, and others have theorized that such a blast was triggered by a nuclear device almost 40 years before the first man-made explosion. Nowhere in Earth's history is there evidence of a spontaneous atomic blast. The heavens, however, hold a partial answer. Using the sun as a model, we know that all stars have, for billions of years, created power through nuclear fusion. Surrounding these stars exist planetary systems much like our own, and it is quite likely also that if there is other intelligent life in the galaxy, they have harnessed such a power. The experiment that took place at Alamogordo, New Mexico, in the summer of 1945, proved that Earth scientists had found a way to trigger a nuclear explosion. From that momentous day until the present, the atomic tests have continued, and the results have been carefully monitored.
Item 289.0 complete.
Startling parallels can be found between man-made blasts and the event at Tunguska. The devastation at Hiroshima provides a glimpse of what occurs at both the center and fringes of a massive explosion. The Hiroshima castle was the exact detonation point. The Soviets carefully compared the after effects both at Hiroshima and Tunguska. At ground zero of the first blast was the Hiroshima castle. Charred, it remained upright even though buildings far sturdier, only a few 100 feet away, were flattened and completely destroyed. This fact coincided perfectly with the telegraph forest effect that had so puzzled Kulik. Evidences of accelerated plant growth in both Japan and Tunguska were observed, as were traces of radioactive material in tree rings. The people of Hiroshima have known almost from the very first day the deadly effects of a nuclear explosion. Coincidentally, the people of Tunguska have suffered similar after effects. Ill health has plagued the entire family of Dorothy Razanen.
Well, none of them were too healthy. They were all healthy enough when they were smaller, but it seems like as soon as they reached 30 or 35, their health all began to fail.
In an effort to confirm or deny their suspicions regarding Tunguska, Soviet scientists conducted one final experiment. They constructed a matchstick forest. It was the exact scale model of the Tunguska blast site. Each tiny matchstick representing a particular stand of trees. They detonated an explosion at the relative altitude of the 1908 blast. Even to their surprise, the pattern of uprooted model trees was identical to the original Tunguska explosion. The evidence supported the Soviet contention that Tunguska was the result of a nuclear holocaust. One nagging question remained. How could a nuclear bomb have been exploded in 1908? Who or what would have had such a capability? Henry Gree is an acclaimed journalist and author of the book New Soviet Psychic Discoveries. He is the only American who has interviewed the man who took up the quest in 1956 to solve the Tunguska mystery, the Russian physicist Alexei Zolotov.
A man with a very long black beard, bald, burning black eyes, fanatical in his dedication to his subject. He has eliminated 10 very interesting theories about the possibility of what had happened on that day in 1908. And he has eliminated each and all of them for various very important scientific reasons to arrive at the conclusion that his one theory is the most valid, namely, that an extraterrestrial civilization had sent a message to Earth for us to know that there is life in outer space, that there is civilization in outer space which is ahead of us and which is watching us very benevolently. This is why, as Zolotov said, this particular explosion took place at Tunguska.
Thomas Atkins explains why he believes that the Tunguska explosion resulted from an alien spacecraft. Eyewitness accounts provided him with the object's course.
And several miles above the Earth, over Siberia, it seemed to have executed an eastward turn and then a very sharp westward turn. It's that westward turn, in fact, that took this object over the more desolate part of Siberia, where it would do no human damage.
They didn't know what happened. They thought it was the end of the earth.
The universe is full of strange things. We know that. We've discovered some of them in the last 20 years. The only way we're ever going to understand the universe is to try to keep an open mind and try to be ready for strange things. J.B.S. Haldane once said, the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine.